My parents paid for my sister's BMW and ignored my struggles for years. When she hit me with a wrench, I took them down in court and destroyed them. The fluorescent lights of the hospital emergency room burned my eyes as I came to. A nurse with kind features leaned over me. Her voice muted and distant like I was underwater. My face throbbed with a pain so intense that breathing hurt. Every pulse of my heartbeat sent another wave of agony through my skull. "Miss Bennett, can you hear me? You've suffered significant trauma to your face. We need to know what happened." Through the haze of pain medication, I could barely form words. My jaw felt wrong, misaligned somehow. The left side of my face was swollen beyond recognition. I tried to lift my hand to touch it, but the nurse gently stopped me. "Don't touch it, sweetheart. Your orbital bone is fractured, and you have a severe concussion. There's also damage to your cheekbone and jaw. The police are here. They need to speak with you about how this happened." Police. The word cut through the fog in my brain. I blinked slowly, trying to piece together the nightmare that had brought me here. My sister Rachel's smug face flashed in my memory. Mom's cold eyes as she handed over that wrench. Dad's iron grip on my wrist as I tried to protect myself. "My family," I whispered, each word sending fire through my face. "They did this." The officer who stepped forward was a woman in her 40s named Detective Lauren Harris. She pulled up a chair beside my hospital bed and opened her notebook with practiced efficiency. "Take your time, Miss Bennett. I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me everything." So I did. Through tears and pain, through the morphine drip that made my words slur, I told her about the dinner that had destroyed my life. It had started 4 weeks ago when Rachel called to announce she was bringing her new boyfriend home for Sunday dinner. My sister was 28, 2 years older than me, and had always been the golden child in our family. Everything she touched turned to gold in our parents' eyes, while I remained perpetually invisible, perpetually disappointing. I had driven to our childhood home in suburban Connecticut, a modest 2-story house that held nothing but bad memories for me. The driveway was already crowded with cars when I arrived. Rachel's silver BMW sat gleaming in the spot closest to the door. Naturally, inside, Mom was setting the table with her good china, the set she only brought out for special occasions. Dad sat in his recliner watching football, barely acknowledging my arrival with a grunt. Nothing new there. I had learned years ago that my presence barely registered on their radar. Rachel swept in 20 minutes later with her boyfriend in tow. His name was Adam, and he was objectively handsome in that generic all-American way. Tall, athletic build, perfectly styled brown hair, and a smile that seemed just a bit too practiced. He wore an expensive watch and designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Everyone, this is Adam Walker," Rachel announced, her voice tripping with pride. "He's a senior investment banker at Goldman Sachs." Mom practically swooned. Dad actually got up from his chair to shake Adam's hand with genuine enthusiasm, something he had never done for anyone I had ever dated. The favoritism was so blatant it would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much. We sat down to dinner with Rachel and Adam positioned at the center of attention, of course. I took my usual seat at the far end of the table, the spot reserved for the family afterthought. Mom had made pot roast, Rachel's favorite, even though she knew I had been vegetarian for 4 years. The conversation flowed around me like I didn't exist. Rachel talked about her job at the marketing firm, about the promotion she was up for, about the vacation to Bali she and Adam were planning. Mom and Dad hung on every word, asking questions, laughing at Adam's mediocre jokes, playing the part of proud parents. I pushed the vegetables around on my plate and tried to make myself smaller, a skill I had perfected over 25 years of being the unwanted daughter. But then Adam turned to me. His gaze had been flickering in my direction throughout the meal, and I had noticed but tried to ignore it. Now he was looking at me directly with an expression I couldn't quite read. "So, Sarah, what do you do?" It was a simple question, polite even. The kind of thing anyone would ask at a dinner party. But the moment the words left his mouth, the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. "I'm a social worker," I said quietly. "I work with at-risk youth in New Haven." "Oh, that's interesting," Adam said, seeming genuinely curious. "What made you choose that field?" I opened my mouth to answer to explain how I had found purpose in helping kids who felt as invisible as I once had when Mom's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't waste Adam's time with your boring stories, Sarah. He's just being polite." Her tone was sharp, dismissive, But I had been spoken to like that my entire life. I should have known better than to respond. I should have just nodded and stayed quiet. But something in me, some tiny spark of defiance I didn't know still existed, made me continue. Actually, it's really rewarding work. Last month, I helped place a 17-year-old girl who I didn't see it coming. 1 second, I was speaking, and the next there was an explosion of pain across the left side of my face. The impact was so sudden, so violent that my brain couldn't process what had happened. I tasted copper. Blood filled my mouth. The chair tipped backward and I crashed to the floor, my head hitting the hardwood with a sickening crack. Through blurred vision, I saw Mom standing over me. She was holding a wrench, one of Dad's tools from the garage. Her face was twisted with rage, with a hatred so pure it took my breath away. "That's what you get for talking back," she hissed. "Who do you think you are, embarrassing your sister in front of Adam?" The pain was indescribable. I could feel something broken in my face. Could feel blood pouring from somewhere. My vision swam. I tried to push myself up, but my arms wouldn't cooperate. Then Rachel's laughter cut through the ringing in my ears. High-pitched, delighted, cruel. "At least now you're pretty," she shrieked, clutching her stomach as she laughed. Did you see her face? Oh my God. Adam was laughing too. Not uncomfortable, nervous laughter, but genuine amusement. Like my pain was the funniest thing he had ever witnessed. I tried to speak to ask why, but my jaw wouldn't work properly. Blood bubbled past my lips instead of words. Rachel's face appeared above me, her eyes sparkling with malicious glee. I think one hit wasn't enough. Mom smiled, actually smiled, and tossed the wrench to Rachel like they were playing catch at a family picnic. "Well, you have a go." Terror gave me strength. I tried to roll away, tried to protect my head with my hands, but David was suddenly there. His massive hands clamped around my wrist, pinning me in place. I struggled, but he outweighed me by 100 pounds. "Hold still," he said calmly, like he was telling me to sit still for a photograph. Rachel raised the wrench. I saw it coming down toward my face, saw the sick excitement in her eyes, and then nothing. When I woke up in the ambulance, I genuinely thought I had died. A paramedic was leaning over me, speaking urgently into a radio. The siren wailed above us. Everything hurt. "Stay with me," he kept saying. "Stay awake." "Okay. We're almost there." Later, I learned that a neighbor had heard a commotion and called 911. Mrs. Sanchez from next door had looked through the dining room window while walking her dog and witnessed the whole thing. She had called the police immediately and then banged on the door, which apparently interrupted whatever else my family had planned for me. Detective Lauren Harris finished taking my statement at the hospital and promised me that she would personally ensure my family faced consequences. She photographed my injuries, took samples of my blood-soaked clothes as evidence, and arranged for me to speak with a victim's advocate. The next morning, despite the doctor's protests, I insisted on seeing myself in a mirror. The woman staring back at me was unrecognizable. The entire left side of my face was purple and swollen to twice its normal size. My eye was swollen shut. Stitches traced jagged patterns across my cheek and forehead where the wrench had split the skin. My jaw was wired shut to let the fractures heal. But my eyes, my one visible eye, burned with something I had never felt before. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that. Not just betrayal or hurt. No, what I felt was cold, calculated determination. They had tried to break me. They had tried to destroy me. But I was still here. And they were about to learn that the daughter they had dismissed their entire lives was far more capable than they ever imagined. The police arrested all three of them within 24 hours. Mom, David, and Rachel were each charged with felony assault with additional charges of conspiracy and attempted murder under consideration. Adam was brought in for questioning as a witness. My hospital room became a command center. Detective Lauren Harris visited daily with updates. The district attorney, a sharp woman named Samantha Green, came to discuss the case personally. Apparently, Mrs. Sanchez's eyewitness testimony combined with my injuries made this one of the most clear-cut assault cases she had ever seen. But I wanted more than just criminal charges. I wanted them to feel the same helplessness, the same humiliation they had inflicted on me my entire life. From my hospital bed, I made phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, Michael Brooks, a former colleague's husband who specialized in family law and civil litigation. He arrived within hours, took one look at my face, and his expression hardened. "We're going to destroy them," he said simply. "Tell me everything." I did. Not just about the assault, but about the lifetime of abuse, neglect, and favoritism that had led to this moment. The birthdays forgotten, the graduations my parents skipped because Rachel had a soccer game, the Christmas when I was 13 and received a single pair of socks while Rachel opened gift after gift, the time in high school when I made honor roll and David told me I was showing off. Michael took notes, his pen moving furiously across his legal pad. "This is a pattern of abuse," he said. "We can use this. Have you documented any of this?" I kept journals. I admit it. Started when I was 15. Every instance of being ignored, belittled or hurt, I just needed somewhere to put all the feelings. His eyes lit up. "Where are these journals?" "Storage unit in New Haven. I moved out of my apartment last year and put some stuff there. The journals are in a box labeled personal. I'll need those. They'll be crucial evidence for both the criminal case and the civil suit I'm going to file on your behalf." Over the next week, as my face slowly began to heal, Michael built our case. He retrieved my journals and had them copied and authenticated. He interviewed former teachers, old neighbors, anyone who had witnessed the differential treatment between Rachel and me. He gathered financial records showing that my parents had paid for Rachel's entire college education while I had taken out loans for mine. He found the college fund my grandmother had left for both of us, only to discover that my parents had given my share to Rachel to buy her BMW. The evidence was damning, overwhelming, a paper trail of parental betrayal stretching back decades. Meanwhile, the criminal case moved forward. My family had hired lawyers, expensive ones, and they were claiming it had been an accident, that I had provoked them, that I was mentally unstable and had hurt myself. But then Mrs. Sanchez testified before the grand jury. She described in bitter detail watching through the window as my mother hit me with the wrench as Rachel prepared to strike me again as my father held me down. She described their laughter, their smiles, the casual cruelty of it all. The grand jury indicted all three of them on multiple felony counts. Adam was charged as an accessory after the fact for not calling 911, and for attempting to help them create a cover story. Rachel's fancy marketing firm put her on immediate leave. David's construction company dropped him from their insurance policy. Mom lost her position on the church board when the pastor learned what had happened. Their perfect lives were crumbling, and I watched it happen from my recovery with grim satisfaction. But I wasn't done. Michael filed a civil lawsuit seeking damages for assault, battery, emotional distress, and a lifetime of abuse and neglect. We sued for $850,000, a number calculated based on their actual assets and future earning potential. "They don't have that kind of money," Michael told me. "But they have equity in the house, retirement accounts, Rachel's BMW valuables. We'll take everything." The depositions were brutal. Michael was merciless, pulling out journal entries, photographs, school records. He brought in my high school guidance counselor, who testified that she had suspected abuse, but couldn't prove it. He found my pediatrician's notes expressing concern about my low weight and withdrawn demeanor as a child. My mother cried during her deposition, playing the victim. "I don't know what happened," she sobbed. "I just snapped. Sarah has always been so difficult, so ungrateful." Rachel was defiant. She was ruining my relationship with Adam. "She always tries to steal attention from me." David barely spoke. Just sat there looking uncomfortable, probably realizing that his retirement savings were about to disappear. The criminal trial came first, 12 months after the assault. I had to testify, had to sit on that stand, and recount the worst night of my life while my family stared at me from the defense table. My face had healed by then, but the scars remained, then white lines that would mark me forever. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Mom got 6 years. David got 5. Rachel got 6. Adam got 2 years probation and community service. The courtroom erupted. Rachel screamed that it wasn't fair, that I had ruined her life. Mom wept. David just looked empty, defeated. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Walking out of that courthouse, I noticed how different the world looked. The sky seemed brighter, the air cleaner. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was carrying a boulder on my shoulders. The weight of their abuse, their judgment, their constant dismissal had been lifted by 12 strangers who had looked at the evidence and declared what I always knew. I was the victim, and they were monsters. The media picked up the story within days. Local news stations ran segments about the House of Horrors in suburban Connecticut. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, outside my parents' house, even outside the hospital where I had initially been treated. Everyone wanted to know how a family could do such a thing to their own daughter. I declined all interview requests at first. Michael advised me to stay silent until after the civil trial, but the story spread anyway. Someone leaked my journals to the press, and suddenly excerpts were being published in newspapers across the state. People read my 15-year-old self's desperate attempts to understand why my parents loved Rachel, but barely tolerated me. They read about the Christmas morning when I was 17 and found an empty box under the tree with my name on it while Rachel opened a new laptop. The public outrage was immediate and intense. Social media exploded with hashtags. Strangers sent me messages of support, sharing their own stories of family abuse and neglect. Some people recognized me on the street and approached to tell me how brave I was. It was overwhelming and strange and somehow validating in a way I never expected. But not everyone was sympathetic. Rachel's friends started a social media campaign claiming I was lying, that I had always been jealous of her, that I had somehow orchestrated the whole thing to destroy their perfect family. They posted old photos of family gatherings where I appeared to be smiling as if a smile in a photograph negated years of systematic abuse. One of Rachel's sorority sisters, a woman named Bethany, went on a local radio show and called me a manipulator. Sarah was always weird, she said. Always playing the victim. Rachel told me years ago that Sarah made up stories for attention. I listened to that interview in my lawyer's office. My hands clenched so tight my knuckles went white. Michael watched me carefully, probably worried I might do something rash. "Let me handle this," he said. "I'll send a cease and desist letter. If she continues, we'll add her to the civil suit for defamation." But something shifted in me during that interview. I realized that staying silent was no longer an option. People needed to hear my side directly, in my own words, not filtered through journalists or court transcripts. I called a press conference for the following week. Michael tried to talk me out of it, worried that anything I said could be used against me somehow. But I was done hiding. I had spent 25 years making myself invisible to keep peace in a family that hated me. Never again. The press conference was held at a community center in New Haven. I wore a simple navy dress and minimal makeup. My scars were visible, thin white lines that caught the camera lights. I had spent an hour that morning deciding whether to cover them with foundation, but ultimately chose to let them show. They were part of my story, proof of what had been done to me. The room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled at receipts, their recorders and notepads ready. I stepped up to the microphone and took a breath. "My name is Sarah Bennett, and I want to tell you who I really am," I began. My voice shook slightly, but I pushed through. "I'm not the ungrateful daughter my family claims. I'm not a liar or an attention seeker. I'm someone who survived 25 years of systematic emotional abuse, neglect, and favoritism that culminated in my mother, father, and sister trying to kill me." I spoke for 20 minutes without notes. I talked about growing up invisible, about watching Rachel receive everything while I received nothing. I talked about the small cruelties that added up over years until I believed I deserved to be treated like I was worthless. I talked about the moment I realized my family didn't just dislike me, they actively wanted to hurt me. When I finished, the questions came rapid fire. How did it feel to testify against my family? Did I regret reporting them? What did I want people to know? I want people to know that family abuse is real and insidious. I said it's not always visible bruises. Sometimes it's being systematically erased, being made to feel like your existence is an inconvenience. And I want other people who are experiencing this to know that it's not your fault and you deserve better. The press conference went viral. Within 24 hours, the video had been viewed over 2.5 million times. Major news networks picked it up. I was invited on national talk shows, though I declined most of them. The story became bigger than just my family. It became a conversation about covert abuse and the way some children are scapegoated by their own parents. My phone rang constantly. Old acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, many of them apologizing for not noticing what was happening, for not intervening. But the most surprising call came from Adam Walker's wife, Rebecca. She reached out through my lawyer's office, asking if I would be willing to speak with her. We met at a coffee shop in Manhattan, neutral territory. Rebecca was elegant and composed, her wedding ring conspicuously absent. She was beautiful in a refined way with dark hair and intelligent eyes that had clearly seen too much. "I need you to know I had no idea," she said immediately. About Adam and your sister. About any of it. I thought he was working late all those nights. I'm not sure. Why you wanted to meet, I said carefully. I don't know anything about your marriage or Adam beyond what happened that night. Rebecca wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I wanted to meet you because I'm divorcing him, and I need to understand who I was married to. A man who could watch what your family did to you and laugh about it. I need to know if there were other signs I missed. We talked for 2 hours. Rebecca told me about Adam's controlling behavior, his need to always be right, the way he belittled her in subtle ways in front of their friends. She told me about finding messages on his phone from multiple women, not just Rachel. She told me how he had gaslit her when she confronted him, making her feel crazy for being suspicious. Your courage and pressing charges helped me find my own. She said, I saw you at the trial testifying about what they did, and I realized I didn't have to stay with someone who scared me. We exchanged numbers and stayed in touch. Rebecca became one of my first clients when I eventually opened my law practice. I helped her navigate her divorce and fight for full custody of her children. Adam fought it, of course, but his criminal record made things easier. No judge wanted to give custody to a man who had stood by while someone was beaten unconscious. The civil trial preparation consumed the next several weeks. Michael and his team worked around the clock building our case. They interviewed everyone from my childhood, teachers, neighbors, my pediatrician, even the parents of friends I had played with in elementary school. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 4 doors down from my parents, testified that she used to see me sitting alone in the backyard for hours while Rachel's friends came and went. I always thought it was odd, she said. Sarah was such a sweet child, but she always seemed so sad. I asked her mother about it once, and she brushed me off, said Sarah preferred to be alone. My second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, now retired, came forward with records she had kept. I documented concerns about Sarah every year I taught her, she explained. She came to school without lunch regularly. Her clothes were often worn or couldn't fit properly. Meanwhile, I had her sister in class a few years later, and Rachel always had the best of everything. It troubled me deeply. I did report it to Child Protective Services twice, but they investigated and closed the case both times. The parents were good at putting on a show during home visits, and there were no physical injuries back then. The system failed Sarah. Every piece of testimony, every document, every photograph built a picture of a childhood marked by intentional exclusion and emotional cruelty. Michael organized it all into a presentation that made my parents' lawyers visibly uncomfortable during depositions. My mother's deposition was particularly revealing. Michael had a gift for asking questions that seemed innocent but backed the witness into corners. Mrs. Bennett, can you tell me why Sarah's bedroom was significantly smaller than Rachel's? Rachel was older, she needed more space. But when Rachel moved out for college, did you give Sarah the larger room? A pause. No. We converted it to a craft room. So, you chose to make a craft room rather than give your younger daughter more space. Sarah never asked for it. Did Sarah ever ask for anything that you gave her? Another pause. Longer this time. She knew money was tight. But money wasn't tight for Rachel's Sweet 16 party, was it? I have receipts here showing you spent over $10,000 on that event. Did Sarah have a Sweet 16 party? Sarah said she didn't want one. Do you have any evidence of her saying that? Silence. Michael pulled out one of my journals already entered into evidence. Your Honor, I'd like to read from Sarah's diary entry dated 2 weeks before her 16th birthday. Rachel, Sweet 16 is in 4 months, and Mom has been planning it for half a year already. I asked if I could maybe have a small party for my birthday with just a few friends from school. And Mom looked at me like I had asked for $1 million. She said, "We see," which is what she always says when the answer is no. I don't know why I even asked. I should know better by now. My mother's face had gone pale. Her lawyer objected, but the damage was done. They tried every legal maneuver to reduce the damages we were seeking. Their lawyers argued that monetary compensation couldn't undo the past, that my family didn't have the resources to pay such a large sum, that I was being vindictive rather than seeking justice. Michael's response was methodical and brutal. The defendants had resources to fund Rachel's college education, purchase her a luxury vehicle, and provide her with every advantage. They chose to exclude Sarah from these benefits despite having equal responsibility to both children. This wasn't poverty, it was intentional deprivation. We've calculated their total assets, including home equity of approximately $225,000, combined retirement funds of $375,000, and additional assets. They have the means to pay. He brought in economic experts who calculated the value of what I should have received growing up, My share of the college fund, the monetary equivalent of the gifts Rachel received that I didn't, even the value of parental attention and emotional support. Dr. Reynolds, in your professional opinion as a child psychologist, what impact does systematic parental favoritism have on the disfavored child? Dr. Reynolds, a respected expert who had reviewed my case files, adjusted her glasses. The research is clear. Children who are systematically favored over their siblings develop entitlement and narcissistic tendencies. But the scapegoated child often develops complex PTSD, depression, anxiety, and a deeply damaged sense of self-worth. Sarah's journals show classic symptoms of this dynamic. She internalized her parents' treatment as evidence of her own unworthiness rather than recognizing their abuse. Can this damage be quantified in monetary terms? The lifetime cost of therapy needed to address this level of trauma can easily reach 6 figures. Additionally, scapegoated children often struggle professionally and personally due to damaged self-esteem, which affects earning potential and relationship stability. The ripple effects are enormous. The defense tried to argue that I seemed fine, that I had a job and an apartment, that I was functional. Michael countered by having my therapist testify about the severe anxiety and depression I had battled since adolescence, the eating disorder I had developed at 16, the self-harm I had engaged in at 18. Sarah learned to hide her pain because expressing it was dangerous in her family, my therapist explained. She became an expert at appearing fine while internally she was falling apart. That's not resilience, that's survival. During a break in the proceedings, I went to the courthouse bathroom and locked myself in a stall. The weight of having my entire childhood dissected in public was crushing. Every painful memory was being dragged into the light, examined, catalogued as evidence. It was necessary, but it was also excruciating. I heard the bathroom door open and 2 women entered, their voices echoing off the tile. Can you believe this case? Who does that to their own kid? I know, and the sister is even worse somehow. At least the parents are old and set in their ways, but the sister is young. She knew better. Did you see the mother's face when they showed those journal entries? She looked like she wanted to disappear. Good. She should be ashamed. They left. Never knowing I was there. Never knowing their casual validation meant more to me than they could imagine. For so long, I had wondered if maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive. Too needy. Too much. Hearing strangers recognize the abuse without prompting helped silence that cruel voice in my head. The civil trial lasted 4 weeks. The jury heard from dozens of witnesses, reviewed hundreds of pages of documents, and saw photos of me at various ages, always on the periphery of family photos, always slightly out of focus, as if even the camera couldn't quite see me. The closing arguments were theatrical. My parents' lawyer painted me as vengeful and money-hungry, someone who couldn't accept that her sister was more successful, and took it out on her family. Michael's closing was quieter, but more powerful. He showed the jury a photo of me at age 8, sitting alone at a birthday party while Rachel opened presents. This is Sarah on her own birthday, he said. Rachel had just opened a gift that was supposed to be for Sarah. Look at her face. Does this look like jealousy or does this look like a child who has already learned that she doesn't matter? He walked them through my entire childhood, year by year, instance by instance. He showed them the pattern, the systematic exclusion, the casual cruelty. The defendants want you to believe this is about sibling rivalry, he said. But this isn't rivalry. Rivalry implies competition. Sarah was never allowed to compete. She was simply erased. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, the 4 women looked directly at me as she read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. $4 million in damages. The civil trial followed a month later. This time, the jury awarded me $4 million in damages, more than we had even asked for. The judge called the abuse I had endured systematic and unconscionable, and praised my resilience. To collect the judgment, the court ordered the sale of my parents' house, the liquidation of the retirement accounts, the seizure of Rachel's BMW and her savings. Everything they had worked for gone. But money wasn't enough. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to be erased. To be nothing. The execution of the judgment was handled by the court-appointed receiver, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret Hoffman, who had been doing this work for 30 years. She was efficient and merciless, which suited me perfectly. I was allowed to be present when they inventoried my parents' house for sale. I had Michael come with me for legal protection, but also for moral support. Walking back into that house for the first time since the assault felt surreal. The dining room had been cleaned, of course. No trace of my blood remained on the hardwood floors, but I could still see it in my mind, could still feel the impact of the wrench, could still hear their laughter. The headaches from the traumatic brain injury I'd sustained made the memories even sharper somehow, like my damaged brain had crystallized that moment in perfect, terrible clarity. The neurologist had warned me the migraines and occasional memory lapses might be permanent. Margaret's team moved through the house cataloging everything of value. Mom's china, the set she had used for Rachel's dinner with Adam, was packed into boxes. Dad's tools, including wrenches, were inventoried and tagged. Rachel's childhood trophies were left behind. They had no resale value. I found myself in my old bedroom. It was exactly as I had left it years ago when I moved out. A twin bed with a faded comforter, a small desk, walls painted a dingy beige. Through the wall I could hear Margaret's team in Rachel's room, which had been twice this size with an attached bathroom. On impulse, I opened the closet. A few old clothes still hung there. Things I hadn't bothered taking. But in the back, behind a box of old textbooks, I found something that made my breath catch. A small wooden box, the kind that might hold jewelry. I pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside were treasures from my childhood, a dried flower from my 8th grade dance that I had gone to alone, a ticket stub from a movie I had saved my allowance for months to see, a birthday card from my grandmother who had died when I was 13, the only person who had ever seemed to genuinely love me. And beneath those items, more journals, ones I had forgotten about from my earliest years of writing. I flipped one open and saw my 11-year-old handwriting. Today was Rachel's birthday party. Mom said I could help serve cake. I said maybe I could have a party too when it's my birthday. Mom said we'd see. She always says, "We'll see." I took the box. Margaret noticed, but said nothing. These were my possessions after all. The court order allowed me to reclaim anything that was rightfully mine. As we left, neighbors watched from their windows and yards. Some looked away when I made eye contact. Others stared openly. I wondered how many had known, had suspected and said nothing. Mrs. Sanchez was there though, standing on her porch. She gave me a small nod and I nodded back. She had been the only one brave enough to act. The house sold quickly despite its dark history. A young couple with a baby bought it unaware or uncaring about what had happened there. I hoped they would fill it with love, that their child would grow up feeling wanted and valued. Maybe it would cleanse the place somehow. But watching someone else move into my childhood home brought unexpected emotions. Not nostalgia. I had no happy memories there. Rather, a strange sense of finality. That chapter was truly over. The building that had housed my misery would be someone else's fresh start. Rachel's BMW was auctioned off. I attended the auction, sitting in the back row. The car sold for $45,000. I thought about all the times Rachel had pulled up in that car, how she had treated it like a badge of honor, proof of our parents' love. Now it belonged to a stranger who just wanted a good deal on a luxury vehicle. My parents' retirement accounts were emptied and transferred to an escrow account. David had worked construction for 40 years, building his 401k slowly and carefully. Mom had worked part-time as a bookkeeper and had a modest IRA. Combined, it was about $375,000 gone in an instant. I thought about David's face when the court officer served him papers at the prison. He had aged a decade in the months since his arrest, his hair now completely gray, deep lines carved around his eyes. For a moment, I had felt something that might have been pity. Then I remembered his hand clamped around my wrist, holding me still while Rachel prepared to hit me again, and the feeling evaporated. Rachel's savings account had $15,000. Everything she had managed to save working at the marketing firm. That was seized, too. So was her jewelry, including the diamond necklace our parents had given her for college graduation. My graduation gift had been a card with $75 inside. But the most satisfying part was the social destruction. The money was important, but watching their reputations crumble was its own reward. Mom's church held a meeting after the trial where they formally revoked her membership. She had been active there for 30 years, leading Bible studies and organizing charity events. The pastor released a statement saying the church couldn't condone such unchristian behavior, and that my mother's actions were antithetical to everything they stood for. David's union brothers turned on him too. Construction workers have their own code, and attacking your own kid violated something fundamental. His former co-workers gave interviews saying they were disgusted that they would have never worked alongside him if they had known what he was capable of. Rachel's college sorority issued a statement disavowing her. They removed her name from their alumni directory and returned a donation she had made the previous year. Her former sorority sisters gave interviews calling her a monster, though I remembered that many of them had been part of the social media campaign defending her. Apparently, principals were flexible when public opinion shifted. Adam lost everything too, even though his sentence was lighter. Goldman Sachs fired him immediately, citing a morality clause in his contract. His professional reputation was destroyed. Investment banking is a small world, and word spread quickly. He couldn't get a job at any reputable firm. I hired a private investigator not just to dig into Adam's marriage, but to track all of them. I wanted to know where they were, what they were doing, how they were surviving. Some might call it obsessive, but I called it self-preservation. These people had tried to kill me. I needed to know they couldn't hurt me again. The investigator, a former FBI agent named Marcus Rivera, was expensive, but thorough. He provided monthly reports with photographs and detailed information. David in prison kept to himself mostly. He had been jumped twice by other inmates who had heard what he had done. Apparently even criminals have standards. He spent most of his time in the prison library reading westerns, avoiding the yard, counting down his sentence. Mom struggled more. She was softer, weaker, unprepared for the harsh reality of incarceration. She had a cellmate who stole her commissary items. She cried during phone calls to the few friends who still took her collect calls. The prison psychiatrist had her on antidepressants. Rachel was in a women's facility 3 hours away. According to Marcus's sources, she had been a problem inmate initially, getting into fights, talking back to guards. She spent 30 days in solitary confinement after throwing food at another inmate. But eventually, she adjusted. She got a job in the prison library and started attending chapel services, probably hoping it would look good for parole. Adam moved back in with his parents in New Jersey after Christina took the apartment in the divorce. He worked as a customer service representative at an insurance company, a humiliating step down from his former position. Marcus's photo showed him looking haggard and defeated, gaining weight, his expensive clothes replaced with cheap business casual wear. Each report brought a grim satisfaction. They were suffering consequences. They were living diminished lives. They were experiencing a fraction of what they had put me through. But I was building something better. With the settlement money, I did several things. First, I paid off my student loans in full, nearly $90,000 that had been hanging over me since graduation. The freedom of being debt-free was intoxicating. Then I bought myself a condo in downtown New Haven, a beautiful 2-bedroom with exposed brick and huge windows. I furnished it carefully, choosing each piece intentionally. Everything was mine, chosen by me, reflecting my taste. It was the first space I had ever inhabited that felt truly like home. I also invested a significant portion, working with a financial advisor to build long-term security. Growing up with nothing had taught me the value of stability. I never wanted to be vulnerable again. The Sarah Bennett Foundation became my passion project. I worked with nonprofit consultants to structure it properly, hired staff, developed programs. We provided legal support to victims of family violence, funded therapy for survivors, and created a shelter specifically for young adults estranged from abusive families. Our first client was a 19-year-old named Sophie whose parents had kicked her out for being gay. She had been sleeping in her car for 4 weeks when she found us. We got her into the shelter, helped her apply for financial aid for college, connected her with a therapist who specialized in family rejection. 7 months later, Sophie stood in my office with tears in her eyes. "You saved my life," she said. "I don't know where I would be without this place." I hugged her and thought about my younger self, desperate and alone, with nowhere to turn. "You saved yourself," I told her. "We just gave you the tools." The foundation grew quickly. Donations poured in after the media coverage of my story. We expanded from 1 shelter to 3 within the first year. We hired more staff, developed more programs. Every person we helped felt like a small victory against everything my family had done to me. But law school was the real turning point. I applied on a whim, not really expecting to get in. My undergraduate grades had been good, but not exceptional. Dragged down by semesters where depression made it hard to function. My LSAT score was strong though. Apparently, years of analyzing why my family hated me had made me good at logical reasoning. Yale Law School accepted me. Yale, one of the top law schools in the country. I stared at the acceptance letter for 12 minutes, convinced it was a mistake. My first day of orientation, I felt like an imposter. Everyone else seemed so confident, so polished, so sure they belonged there. I kept waiting for someone to realize I didn't fit, that I was just the unwanted daughter of convicted felons who had gotten lucky. But then we started classes, and something clicked. The law made sense to me in a way nothing else ever had. It was logical, structured, grounded in precedent and reason. There were rules, and when people broke those rules, there were consequences. Unlike my family, where cruelty had been arbitrary and unpredictable, the law was consistent. I excelled. Professor Martinson, who taught criminal law, pulled me aside after class one day. "Have you considered prosecution? You have a talent for this." "Actually, I'm thinking about family law," I said. "Domestic violence, child welfare, custody disputes." She studied me for a moment. "Because of your case. Everyone at Yale knew who I was. My story had been national news. Some students treated me differently because of it, either avoiding me or treating me with excessive pity. But Professor Martinson just nodded like I had given the correct answer to a legal question. "Good," she said. "We need lawyers who understand what they're fighting for." I graduated second in my class. The valedictorian was a brilliant guy named Thomas who was heading to clerk for a Supreme Court justice. I was happy with second place. It proved I belonged there on merit, not sympathy. I passed the bar exam on my first try and opened my practice 6 months later. Bennett Legal Services, specializing in family law and domestic violence cases. I rented a small office space, hired 2 associates fresh out of law school, and took on clients who couldn't afford the big firms. My first major case was representing a woman named Diana, whose husband had been abusing her for 13 years. She had 3 kids and no job, completely financially dependent on her abuser. She came to me with a black eye and a desperate hope that I could help her escape. We got her an emergency restraining order, then built a case for full custody and spousal support. Her husband's lawyer was slick and expensive, painting Diana as unstable and manipulative, but I knew those tactics. I had seen them used against me. We won. Diana got custody, support, and protection. Her ex-husband got supervised visitation only. When the judge read the verdict, Diana grabbed my hand and squeezed it so hard it hurt. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing me." "Always," I said. "I'll always believe survivors." The practice grew steadily. Word spread that I was good, that I cared, that I understood what my clients were experiencing in a way other lawyers didn't. Within 3 years, I had expanded to a staff of 17, including 5 attorneys, several paralegals, and support staff. We took on cases the big firms wouldn't touch. Poor clients, complicated situations, people the system had failed repeatedly, and we won more often than we lost. I hired a private investigator and had him dig into Rachel's relationship with Adam. Turns out Adam had a wife and 2 kids in Manhattan that Rachel never knew about. I made sure she found out anonymously, of course, right before she reported to prison. I used some of the settlement money to establish a foundation for victims of family violence, naming it after myself. The Sarah Bennett Foundation became well known in Connecticut, and every article about it mentioned what my family had done to me. Their names were forever linked to child abuse and attempted murder in Google searches. I attended the first few parole hearings, giving victim impact statements describing the ongoing effects of their abuse. Each time parole was denied, but after the 3rd hearing, I stopped going. They no longer had power over me, and I refused to let them take up any more of my time. Rachel eventually was released after serving her full 6-year sentence with time off for good behavior in the last year. Mom never made it to a parole hearing. Years passed. My scars faded, but never disappeared completely. The migraines from my TBI came and went, usually triggered by stress. I went to therapy, lots of therapy, and slowly rebuilt myself. I changed careers using part of the settlement to go back to school for a law degree. I graduated top of my class and opened my own practice representing victims of domestic violence and family abuse. Mom died in prison of a heart attack when she was 62, about 4 years into her sentence. I didn't attend any service. David was released after serving his full sentence and moved to Arizona, where he lived alone in a trailer park. Rachel got out after serving her full 6-year sentence. She tried to contact me once, a letter claiming she had found God and wanted to apologize. I burned the letter without reading past the first